I'm Fritz Carr, and I'm talking to you from Phoenix, Arizona. The date is January 12, 1994. The date on the VCR film you see is 1985. That's when it was done in color. It had been transferred from 8mm camera tape. This is about J.M. Carr and his family in the 1950s. I am one of the family. I am the second oldest. My brother Jim was the oldest, and Cliff Carr, C.J. Carr, was the one under us, and then there was John and Joe, the younger brothers. These are Minneapolis machines, Minneapolis Moline, that is, tractors. That's when they came out and were quite successful in those days, in the 1950s. They were one of the leading tractors of the day. They're plowing in the pictures that you see now, and they have 4 or 5 outfits, one Caterpillar tractor in the bunch, and there are 3 brothers and 2 or 3 employees they had working for them. They're plowing in lands of 10 to 20 acres when you plow back and forth, and then they also plow around the field in big quarter section fields. These you summer fallow, or you plow in early spring and then you seed with the disc and the drill outfit, or you can use a plow and a pony drill, which has a packer in front of it behind the plow, and a lot of pony drilling went on in those days, planting later crops, flax and barley and things like that. You can see it's dusty there on the film, so it isn't very wet for that year. The Caterpillar was used for wet ground when you had wet years. Worked better than the wheel tractors. These are Cliff's kids, and he had a lot of them. Cliff had 12 kids, and my brother Jim had 12 also. I had 9, and my youngest brother John had 8, and Joe had 4, and I had 2 sisters. They had girls, 3 girls, and one had 4 girls. That's one of the employees, a gentleman of the name of Mr. Parks. That's their St. Bernard dog. It grew to quite a size. As it got bigger, it's more or less a young pup there. The kids really liked it, and he seemed to like kids too. I've got a guitar here, and I can add a little music now and then when the scenery and the activity gets low. The girls seem to like that dog. Those were the days. The 1950s. We all got married, the 3 brothers, in 1946. And as I said, I'm speaking to you now in 1994. So retired and not working very hard anymore. My brother Jim has passed away, and my dad and the 2 sisters' husbands have all left the world also. These are the feedlot cattle. They bought young calves in the spring and roamed them out on the pastures in the western part of North Dakota. And they took them out there at about 300-400 pounds, and they hoped to come back with them about double that weight. They would put them in the feedlot and then fatten them up to anywhere from 800-900 pounds to 1,200 pounds, depending on how good the price was in the fall. You can see these animals here are in very good shape. What you're looking at there is top North Dakota beef, white-faced Herefords. There were some black white-faced cattle in the bunch too. They crossbred them with Angus and had white-faced blacks, which were considered a great beef animal. They had large feedlots with herd king silos that had automatic feeders, and they fed them very scientifically. There you can see two cats following each other. That was a wet year. Those are cedar drills with double discs in front of them. You could seed in wet ground as long as the packer in front of the disc or the double disc didn't gum up. That's the way they seeded when it was wet. They seeded lots of ground in those days. They planted durum in the early spring, wheat later on, barley later yet, oats, some oats, not a lot of oats, a lot of flax in the 50s. That was a later crop also. We had to watch out for frost for flax because it wouldn't take much cold weather. And that's the Caterpillar tractors that we use. Now you see the other tractors there. There's a whole slew of them out there. They had Minneapolis Molines. My dad was a Minneapolis Moline dealer in town. He had a business called Nicholson and Carr Implement. A man by the name of Don Nicholson was his partner, and he had an elevator out in the country, a grain elevator. They were big operators in those days, 4,000 up to 12,000 acres of crop seeded in the spring, combined in the fall. Fields were large. 100 acres was a small field. Quarter sections were quite common. I would really believe that there were some areas that had whole sections. This is my brother or my sister's wedding. George Carpenter, she married from Hastings, Minnesota. I'm not going to guess what year that was because I can't remember. That's one of Cliff's kids there, and there's my dad and mother standing there with Helen and her new husband, George. In a little while you'll see the mother and dad of George. There they are, standing in the middle there. That's George's folks from Hastings, Minnesota. George was a state biologist in North Dakota. Here's the wedding car. The usual signs on the side, been going on for hundreds of years, I guess. There's my brother Cliff coming across. Probably taking pictures, I suppose. Yeah, George doesn't know what to do with his new bride. He's got too many little duties there that husbands get caught in. I had two sisters, Helen, who stayed in Carrington all of her life. She worked for the hospital, medical records. She's still working. The other sister, Evie, went out to the west coast to Lakewood, California, near Long Beach. Her husband went to work for the aircraft companies, McDonnell Douglas, Northrop, and some others. She was a beauty operator. She's still working. There's my brother Cliff's wife, Louise. That's the young end of the family of 12 kids. The older brother Jim had 12 kids also. I had 9. And my youngest brother John had 8. And Joe had 4, and my sisters one had 3 and one had 4, all girls. Kids look like they're enjoying themselves. sure they don't know that we are sitting here watching them. Yeah, that is a picture of an old TV. Now, you know the kind we have in 1994. There comes the combines. They were Minneapolis Moline also. They were the first successful self-propelled combine. One of the first anyway. We had good success with those machines. That's my dad on the front one there. He loved to run those combines. Harvesting was his fun and interest. He liked bonanza farming. He came from New Hampton, Iowa. His dad lived in Iowa. He came from Ireland. They were Irishmen. He went to work in a yellow cab company in Minneapolis, but didn't stay there long. He came out to North Dakota to work for an uncle who was considered a bonanza farmer in those days. That was way back in the 1919s. My dad lived to be 93. He must have run farm machinery until he was well past his 80th birthday. He was a born farmer. He loved it. That's my oldest brother, Jim. Jim is no longer with us either. He passed away. And there's Joe, the brother, second from the youngest. And there's one of them adjusting the cylinder for concave spacing. When the grain is tough, you gotta raise them closer together, and when it gets dry in the afternoon, you gotta let them down, otherwise you crack the grain. You also adjust the speed of the cylinder. That's the elevator owned by Don Nicholson. You can see how they piled the grain on the ground those years. Those were bonanza years for farming. Great years in the 50s and the 60s. Farmers made money. Feedlots again. I think I mentioned they were large feedlots that had Herd King silos, which was an automatic feeder type of silo, and they fed 500 to 800 head of cattle in those feedlots. There were 2 of them. They would run them on the range in the summertime, and in September or so they'd bring them back and put them in the feedlots, hoping to make money on them after the first of the year. Anytime from February and March forward, they would wait for the price to be right and run them through the sales rings. It was hard to make money with feedlot cattle. It cost you so much money for feed. Everything was done very scientifically. The state agricultural colleges had all kinds of formulas for fattening cattle in those days, and they still do, I suppose. There is somebody riding a Harley Davidson. My brother Cliff was in the Navy Air Corps during World War II, and he was stationed down here in Phoenix for a while. Said he had a Harley Davidson then, and would ride it around the hills of the basin here in Arizona. He had an airplane for a while too. He was in the Navy Air Corps, a warrant officer, I think, and he became a private pilot when he got out, and he had a couple of different aircraft before he decided it was either too expensive or too dangerous. I'm not sure which. That's Jesse, one of the employees. He was a great bike rider. There's George Carpin, my sister Helen's husband. And that's brothers in the hired men. There's Cliff there. I think Carl and Jesse were the men who were riding the motorcycle most of the time. They liked a lot of speed and a little bit of danger too, as you can see. That's Carl there. Yeah. They straight combined a lot of grain in those days when it got ripe enough. Not too many weeds. For a long time they didn't think it was possible to straight combine. They usually cut it down in swaths and let it dry and then picked it up with pickup type combine. My dad introduced most of the straight combining that was done in that area in the 50s. There weren't very many farmers doing that. Eating dinner out in the field. That was my mother that you saw there. They lived in town, my folks, but she hauled dinner out a lot of the time. That was the way she did through her younger years. They just parked the combines and ate dinner and went back to work again. Take about 20 minutes, I suppose. Didn't lose much time. And in the good harvesting days of August and September, they could go from probably 9:30 in the morning to about the same time in the evening, and sometimes later, depending on the dew. I used to play a guitar when I was a kid. Now I'm an old kid and I still play a guitar. They used to go traveling in the winter time, the farmers, the older ones that is, that were more or less retired. My dad and his partner Don used to go to St. Petersburg, Florida, and other parts around there in the wintertime for a couple of 3 months. You'll see some of the roadside pictures later on in the film on driving down to Florida. This is kind of a whited out part of a combine scene. I don't know what happened. Something happened. That was my brother John there, leaning there, and there's one of the employees in the truck, and they're eating again. Farmers like to eat too, you know. They are known as good eaters. My dad there. That's Brother John and Jesse. My mother standing over there. It's a Packard car. They sold Packard cars too. They sold Chryslers and Studebegers, Dodges. That was my mother there that you saw. And there's Louise, my brother CJ's wife, and got a lot of kids around her. Combining was a great time. That grain run into the truck just like gold. Prices in some of those years, $5 to $7 for durum, a bushel of durum, $3, $4 for a bushel of wheat. Flax would go up to $10 a bushel some years. Flax was like gold. That's when they invented tarps for the truck. Before that, when it wasn't worth anything, they didn't care whether some of it blowed away, but when it got expensive, then you didn't want to waste any of it. There's a sign, August 21st, 1956. That's my dad, my brother. My dad smoked in those days. My mother. She was called the straw boss, but I think she was probably more the boss. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 there. Yeah, there's the trucks and the pickups. Pickups had fuel tanks on them and parts and stuff. My dad in the front one there. Combines. Later on in the 80s, 70s and 80s, they went to Massey Ferguson combines. The Minneapolis Moline line faded out somehow. Didn't make the grade, I guess. They used Massey Ferguson's for years, all the way through the 80s. That's one of my brothers there. Another one. Young and frustrated. There's my oldest brother Jim. He likes cigars. Jim passed away in 1982. He had an accident with a combine. Carl, one of the employees, he was grain hauler. Jesse was the other one. He was a wild one. He's the one that liked to ride motorcycles in circles. I was in the broadcast business for about 25 years. Taping commercials and stuff was the name of the game. But we had good equipment. This tape recorder I got here is about $39 worth.